All right. We still have a few folks coming in, but let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to our first virtual lunchbox talk of the North Carolina Botanical Garden. Thank you all for joining us today. For those who don't know me, I'm Joanna Lalikas. I'm the Director of Education at the North Carolina Botanical Garden. And with me, I also have Ben Tupper, our Public Programs Coordinator. He and I will be co-moderating today. And Ben, if you can go to the next slide, we'll share some of our contact information. So I did want to let you all know that we are recording the webinar, so it'll be available for future viewing. And we'll share the link to folks who register through our registration system, but also through other modes to get it out in other ways. And really, we've missed seeing you at the garden, and so many familiar names in the attendee list that I'm excited to see. We've really missed you all. We're also excited to be able to welcome some new folks to join our virtual lunch table here today. And I do hope that you and your families are healthy and safe as we all traverse these uncertain times. And I want to take a moment to really thank all of the folks that are working on the front lines of this pandemic in our healthcare system here at UNC Chapel Hill and elsewhere, and all the others who are working tirelessly to keep everyone safe, healthy, and cared for. At the North Carolina Botanical Garden, we're working hard to develop some ways that we can stay connected with you, our community, during this period of time with so many disruptions and uncertainty. So while we're all staying physically distanced from one another, we want to help to maintain some social ties and connections virtually. And we've been doing that. This is our first offering of a virtual lunchbox talk, so a live version. And we want to extend opportunities further out to beyond our existing community to other folks who are looking for new ways to stay socially connected while they're physically distant. Community is important to us and always has been here at the Botanical Garden. We are all presenting from our home offices today. So we're working on other ways to connect with you, and you can find many of these on our website. And we are also sharing some of these out on social media. And we have more in the works, and we'd really want to hear from you. We want to make sure that we're meeting your needs and interests related to our mission for virtual and online programs, and for activities that we can share with you to do at home or in natural areas where you might be seeking exercise or solace, such as the Piedmont Nature Trails behind the Botanical Garden and other natural areas that are still open despite the fact that our main gardens are closed to the public. So right now our face-to-face educational programs are on hold through June 30th, and that ultimate time frame is really uncertain right now. But what we do know is that virtual programming will continue to be a part of our programming into the future no matter what. And so we want your help in making sure it fits your needs and interests. So let us know your thoughts. Zoom will open a browser after you close out to offer you a Qualtrics survey you can fill out to give us feedback. You can send an email to me or to Ben. Our email addresses are available for you here, or to any Botanical Garden staff that you are comfortable reaching out to. And then we'll make sure that we are engaging you meaningfully while the main garden is closed and beyond into the future. All right, so with that, before we move into the webinar content, we want to make sure that everyone's familiar with the Zoom interface and how to use various tools. And then we'd like to get to know a little bit about who is on the webinar and make sure that Mike knows that. Ben and I have been seeing the registrations. So, and it's a little opportunity to get you to engage with the platform. We'll be using some polls. So I'm gonna turn it over to Ben momentarily to walk through the Zoom dashboard with you.
Hey, thanks, Joanna, and welcome everyone. This is really exciting to have our first virtual Lunchbox talk, as Joanna said. Again, my name's Ben Tupper. I'm going to be helping moderate here a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. So if we have any technical questions and things like that, feel free to shoot them my way. So I just wanted to give everyone a quick overview of the Zoom webinar dashboard. And the settings that you have the ability to change as participants or as attendees in this webinar. It's different from a normal Zoom meeting in that you will not have access to your camera or speaking capabilities. We might be able to do some live Q&A at the end, and I'll walk through how that's all going to work. So here at the bottom of my screen here, you'll see these are the main settings that you'll be able to change and troubleshoot if something is kind of going a little bit funny. So the first here is the audio settings. So you'll be muted by default. As I said, if you click the little caret menu down in the audio settings, you'll get some more options. For this webinar, it'll be specifically for output. So how you want your speakers to be arranged, if it's with your computer speakers or with your headphones if you're wearing them. The next one that you might interact with is chat. So chatting allows you to interact with other attendees and panelists, and just be aware in the webinar format, if you do chat to another attendee, it'll automatically go to panelists as well, just so you're aware that the panelists will be able to see the chat that's going on that allows us to help moderate and help answer any questions. So for this webinar, we're also going to do some polls, as Joanna mentioned, and you can enter those answers using the chat if there's an other category that we don't have a choice for. This is also a great place to ask for some technical support. If you're having something's going funny with Zoom, feel free to chat in, and I'll be monitoring that chat throughout this entire webinar. Also, just to let you know, the chat is going to be saved. So we're going to save the transcript just so we can save some of those answers that y'all are giving us throughout the webinar. The next feature that you'll see here is the raise hand feature, and I saw that someone had already used that a little bit earlier. So this is mainly an accessibility feature. So if you don't feel comfortable typing your question or you want to be able to talk live during the webinar, you can raise your hand and we'll get to you at a nice stopping point. So if you do raise your hand, the moderators will be notified, and then maybe at the end we can unmute and you can ask a question. For right now, obviously everyone is muted, so we can give our full attention to Mike during his presentation. And the last bit of Zoom webinar dashboard overview is the Q&A. So this is the main interface that you'll use as attendees to ask questions to the speaker. You can ask your question, you can attach your name to it if you want, or you can do it anonymously. So that way we'll be able to see those, and those will queue up throughout the entire time. And then we can answer them, and then we can go live at a good stopping point. So we have our first question coming in about Mike's, did Mike get a haircut? All right. So again, thanks everyone for being patient with the Zoom layout. This is our first one, and we're creating some more robust tutorial systems for everyone as well that I'll be sending out shortly.
Thank you, Ben. So since this is our first virtual Lunchbox talk, we'd like to get to know who's at the table, so to speak, our lunch table here, virtual lunch table. So we'll be using some polling, and Ben's going to pull up the first poll that you'll be able to interact with. You should see some options there, and just click on the bubble that's your best answer. The first question, are you joining us from the Triangle region of North Carolina? And I'm seeing some no. So with that, if you want to type into the chat box, where are you joining us from? We would love to know who's with us from outside the Triangle region. 32% from outside the Triangle. That's great. Anybody want to type into the chat? Let's see, coastal region, Pamlico County, Georgia, Goldsboro, Wilmington. Wonderful. So glad to have you all with us. Atlanta, Georgia, Wilmington, Fresno, California. I think you're the award for the farthest away so far. All right. Well, thank you for participating in that one. I think we can bring up the next question, Ben. Have you visited the North Carolina Botanical Garden before? Even if you're not from the Triangle, have you visited us before? Great, we've got fewer no's, I think, than we had folks from a distance. So some of you all who are from other folks may have been here before. That's exciting. Yes, once 11%, a few times 8%, many times 64%. So we have some longtime friends with us and some new folks. So we do hope that you'll join us once the garden has opened again and come visit. Meanwhile, those who are nearby, please know that our nature trails, our natural areas are open, and you can learn more about that on our website. All right, next poll, and this is the last one, and then we'll move on. How did you hear about this virtual lunchbox talk? Was it the e-newsletter, our new e-newsletter? That's our social media roundup. Next ones will be in our monthly newsletter. Did you get an email from Ben, meaning you've attended a lunchbox talk before? Did you find it on social media? Okay, looks like a lot of folks got it through the e-news. Some folks from the email from Ben, and some social media, and some other. What are the other sources that you've heard from? You can type that into the chat for us so we know where our programs are being found. Twitter, excellent. Anybody else want to share? A friend at work, great. Yeah, you're always welcome to share this information forward. All right. Well, thank you all so much. Was just searching botanical gardens since we just moved to North Carolina last summer. So glad you found us. Twitter, wonderful, wonderful. All right. Well, we are ready to move on and hear from Mike Kuntz today. Mike Kuntz, our conservation ecologist at the North Carolina Botanical Garden at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He received his bachelor's and his master's degrees in biology from the University of Colorado, Boulder, and is currently pursuing a PhD in plant ecology here at UNC Chapel Hill. Since joining the garden in 2005, he's worked on the management of natural areas and on the ex situ conservation and restoration of imperiled plants. And Mike's interest is in the ecology, reintroduction, and phylogeography of rare plant species. So we'll have some time for questions immediately after Mike's presentation, but and we may have some stopping points in between. So go ahead and type your questions that you have in the midst of the presentation into the Q&A, and we'll find stopping points to answer some of those and then have some time at the end. So thank you, and Mike, go ahead and unmute and I'll hand it off to you. Thanks.
All right, great. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you all can see my slides. And just first, I wanted to reiterate Joanna's thank you for coming to our first virtual talk and taking part. It's an honor to be the guinea pig for this, to be the first one doing this and trying to learn and figure out how this is all working. So I'm glad that I can do this and take part. I wish we could be meeting in face-to-face under more fortunate circumstances, but we're going to continue to work with what we have here today and hope that this is a good experience for everybody. So also just wanted to say thank you before I forget to some folks who really helped make this possible. Johnny Randall, my supervisor, giving me so many opportunities into the garden, and so many friends and colleagues at other gardens who've helped inspire this and have helped teach me so much of about seed banking in general. So I know I saw a few colleagues from Georgia that jumped in. So super happy that they're here to listen as well. So and with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So a little bit more about me. Super passionate about native plants, and particularly interested in how we undergo conservation actions for native plants as we face unprecedented global change. I also have a lot of interest in seeds, everything from growing vegetables and plants with my kids to counting thousands of seeds from invasive grasses in graduate school, and the work that I do here at the garden. So this brings us to the kind of big question of where we're looking at today, of how and why do we save seeds. And I hope that through this talk, I can kind of give you an overview of why seed banks are important and what we're doing to improve society, to improve the world for everybody. And lastly, I'll close up with some of the things that we're doing here at NCBG with our seed bank that's contributing to part of this as well. And I hope through this you'll gain some appreciation for all the amazing work that's being done by seed banks around the world, and all the things that go into saving our seeds and, in a way, saving ourselves. So let's start with a seed, the very humble seed. It doesn't matter what the species is, whether it's the smallest, tiniest orchid seeds that are like dust, or the largest, the Seychelles double coconut, which is probably bigger than my head. Seeds store the material, the genetic information that flowering plants need to continue from one generation to the next. It's how plants reproduce. And it was the evolution of seeds that was one of the reasons that helped make flowering plants so successful. So of course, non-flowering plants like ferns and mosses, liverworts don't have seeds. So we're talking about just our flowering plants here today and things that we can bank, although those other species and genera are things that we can bank as well. Seeds are, I think anyways, seeds are really amazing. They vary in color, they vary in texture. They can do so much of us. They have different forms and functions. They provide us with nutrition, sometimes directly. Eating whole grains, we all know is very healthy for us, but also indirectly, and just that they sustain generation after generation of plant. They can fascinate us from the little helicoptering samaras of maple seeds that you watch fall from the trees. The red maples are falling like crazy right now. To watching an ant carry seeds across your yard. They're really quite amazing. They teach us about ecology and evolution, and they help heal us through restoration. They heal our land. They pack so much into tiny little package. But unfortunately, there's really intense pressure on all of our natural resources, but particularly on plants as well, because of the change that we're currently undergoing on Earth. According to the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, that there are overwhelming demands for both social and environmental pressures and relating or causing crises that we've got to be able to deal with. We're taxing our food and water system, we're exceeding capacity for these things, and we've had unprecedented loss of biodiversity, and losing that means we're also losing the services that plant life and animal life provides to us. And all suggestions are is these trends are going to continue. And so we've got to find ways that we can mitigate against these changes and help improve our world. And in the world of seeds, one of the things that we talk about is this idea of seed banks. So because seeds have so much value to us through things like our food security and biodiversity, and the threats to lose things like drought tolerance in our crops, good tasting and nutrition in crops, for native seeds, adaptations to local conditions that improve restoration and success. We've got to have these banks available to us to help store these seeds for the future and for us to be able to gain better understanding. So seed bank at its most basic is a place that stores seeds. And that can be anything from something very formal to something pretty informal. But as far as conservation tools are concerned, dollar for dollar, they're extremely cost efficient compared to some other conservation measures. And not that I'm saying those other conservation measures like land Conservation, getting conservation lands isn't important. Those are still the most important things. But seed bankings are an inexpensive tool that can help mitigate some of these other challenges that we face as well. The other advantage to seed banks is seeds are tiny, and they, with the exception of maybe the giant double coconut I talked about, but they take up really little space. So you can put a lot of seeds into a tiny little area. Now, the idea of seed banking isn't necessarily a new concept. It's something that's probably been around since humans figured out how to conduct any form of agriculture. Saving seeds from one year to the next to be able to plant new crops or to plant new food species is something that's been going on for a really, really long time. But physical seed banks are a fairly recent construct, probably about the early 1900s. Most of these early seed banks, and still most of the seed banks in the world, primarily work on wild crop relatives and crop species themselves, so they're very food related. But in the last 30 or so years, 30 or 40 years, there's been more and more seed banks that have been starting to come online that focus on these wild plants or native plants. So here's a map from O'Donnell and Schrock 2017 that kind of goes through and shows where some of these seed banks are. Now, according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, there's approximately 1,700 seed banks across the entire world. But as you can see from this map, they're not very evenly distributed. We get a lot of, in the darker blues here, higher numbers of seed banks. And you can see that a lot of these are in temperate regions. United States and Europe mostly, and Australia all have a lot of seed banks. But a lot of the other parts of the world that have high diversity in the tropics, so I've switched now to this purple map, you can see that there's not a lot of seed banks that are falling into those categories or into those places that have this high diversity. So we've still got a lot of gaps and where we need seed banks to be doing work and some of the things that we're doing. So the other thing that you'll notice now, the black dots on this map are showing locations of seed banks. There are about 370 native plant seed banks represented by these dots throughout the world, and 74 different countries. And these seed banks primarily are working on storing native species, either locally or from around the world. But regardless of the focus, most seed banks are really highly cooperative ventures. So we really rely on the network for understanding and for doing good conservation work. So some of the seed banks, let's see, we're going to do a little tour here of some seed banks that you may have heard of, or if not, these are some of the larger ones. Perhaps the most famous seed bank currently is Svalbard Global Seed Vault. The purpose for this seed bank is to back up crop collections from anywhere in the world. There's actually a pretty cool story of how they held backup collections from a seed bank in Syria. The seed bank is in Aleppo, and because of the ongoing civil war, the seeds were under threat, and the seed bank ultimately was destroyed during a bombing raid in Aleppo. But thankfully, those crop seeds were stored here at Svalbard, and now that the seed bank in Syria has found a more stable place to operate, they've been able to send some of those seeds back to Syria in order for the Syrians to work on those and to help protect food security in that part of the world as well. Svalbard is pretty interesting. It's located way up here. Here's Greenland, and there's this little circle, this little set of islands here. Way up here, it's about as far north as a person can fly on a scheduled flight. So it's very remote. It's very unpopulated. There's almost nobody there except for the people who work at the seed bank. So it's good in that respect. It's buried 100 meters into the side of a mountain. So it's got geological stability, low humidity, it's above sea level. They did have a little bit of an issue a few years ago with some permafrost that melted up there, but the seeds were all okay, and they've figured out how to mitigate those challenges from climate change as well. This is an interesting one, the Vavilov Institute of Plant Industry. It's in St. Petersburg, Russia. It's probably the one of the largest and the oldest seed bank. No one knows quite exactly when it started. The best guesses are about 1921, and it's named in honor of that gentleman there in the chair, Nikolai Vavilov, who raced through parts of Russia and Eastern Europe looking to collect food crops and species that are potentially valuable for food resources. A cool story that comes out of this is during World War II, during the siege of Leningrad, the curators actually locked themselves inside of the seed vaults in order to protect those seed resources. And they were in there for so long that several of them starved to death, which I guess is not very cool, but it's pretty amazing. It shows the dedication that they have, because they had a whole bunch of seeds they could have eaten to figure out how to stay alive. And rather than lose their resources, they starved to death to save those. So seed people we're pretty intense about and passionate about what we do. The Millennium Seed Bank, this is the largest seed bank in the world that works with wild species, with native species. It's in Sussex, England. It's part of the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. This is out at their country garden, Wakehurst Place. It's an ultra secure facility. They've got backup generators. They claim it's explosion proof because the seed vaults are all buried underground and reinforced and protected. They store native seed from around the world, only common species in the US, from the US, but rare species and common species from the rest of the world. It's only common species from the US because of the partnership that they have with the Center for Plant Conservation, which is a North American institution of botanic gardens that work on storing rare plant seeds. I'll talk more about CPC a little bit later on as well. But MSB currently has about a million collections. Sorry, that's the seeds on the slide. It should say collections, and they have space for up to 1 billion. So this is a massive facility. This is also a place that I've been honored to go when we had partnerships with Seeds of Success and the Millennium Seed Bank project. I got to go to this facility and get some training, and it's pretty amazing place. Another place, and this is one that a lot of people don't realize, that we've got one of these massive and world-renowned seed banks in the United States. It's a United States Department of Agriculture facility in Fort Collins, Colorado, the National Laboratory for Genetic Resource Preservation. And as the name implies, they do way more than seeds. They store plant and animal tissues. They store insects, they store pollen, they store mycorrhizae, so microorganisms that are important to plants, a lot of these symbionts. So they do a lot of different work beyond just crop seeds. And they also delve into some native plants. The numbers of collections they have aren't quite as large as some of the other large seed banks, but they have a large number of species, 13,000 species that they have banked here. They were also one of the first organizations, the first seed banks in the world to start using freezers, and we'll learn why that's important here in just a little bit. So these are all some of our really large and impressive seed banks, but their seed banks come in all shapes and sizes. There's small community seed banks that exist all over the world that help local farmers conduct agriculture. There are larger versions of this, like the Center for Tropical Agriculture. One of my favorites, I don't know why, I think it's interesting, there's an International Potato Center that focuses primarily and solely on potato research and cultivation. And of course, botanical gardens. So here's a great shot of NCBG. The majority of those 370 native plant gardens that were on that purple map earlier are botanic gardens. And this number has been increasing over the last 20 or so years. The numbers of seed banks, and particularly those at gardens, has been increasing. So botanic gardens play a huge role in this world and in what's going on. So seed banks, we're not just hoarding for a crisis. We're not just taking all of our seeds and holding on to them forever. We're doing science. We're working at making these better. So seed banks do a lot of different work. We work on research on seed longevity. There's work that's done on different storage techniques and germination ecology. Seed banks do research on genetics, the amount of diversity that we need to be storing and for how long we can maintain that diversity in a seed bank. And then one of the biggest things is we don't just want seeds in a freezer until they're dead. We don't want to, as a good friend and colleague said, freeze until they're dead. That's not our goal. The goal is actually to have uses for these seeds, to be able to take them out of the bank and improve the resources that we have, whether that be food, natural areas. So we do a lot of work and research with that. So, as I said, one of the big questions that seed banks try to ask is, how long do seeds live? So what's seed longevity? Seeds age over time. They're living biological things, so they aren't static. And so we can't just build a seed bank, put some seeds in it, and say we're done, because the seeds don't last forever. But one of the things we can start to look at is how long they last. So this is a pretty amazing example. There's a seed that was found from this plant here, Silene stenophylla, that was buried 124 feet underneath the Siberian permafrost in Russia. And scientists found this seed, and they were able to extract tissue from the seed and get this plant to grow in a test tube. Now, while this technically wasn't still a viable seed because the seed didn't germinate, it does show that there is long-term viability of DNA under very specific types of conditions. So a 32,000-year-old seed is pretty unreal. But the other thing we see, the oldest seed that we do have on record that germinated on its own is this one here. This is a seed from a Judean date palm. It was recovered from excavations from Herod the Great's palace in Israel. And they were able to get this seed from this date palm to germinate. It's a male. Date palms have male and female plants separate. So this is a male plant, and it became reproductive in 2015. And it represents a species that has been extinct for over 800 years. So it's pretty amazing that from this 2,000-year-old seed, we've got pollen that we can start to do continued science with. But as I said, these are biological organisms, and 2,000 years old is really old. There's only a few things that really live that long on Earth anyways. So what's a more realistic? What are the things we know about seeds? And we know that nothing is forever. All seeds age over time. So here in this graph from Walters 2015, we can see that this is kind of a typical pattern that seeds in storage would have. And this is just a generic seed. It could be any species. Time on the x-axis here on the bottom could be any unit. So what we want to do is we need to figure out as seed scientists where this change happens, where this threshold arrow is. Because you can see that for a long time when we put seeds in storage, they remain pretty stable. But at some point, we start to have rapid mortality. We start to have rapid aging, rapid death. And what we don't want is to take our seeds out of a seed bank way down here in this curve, because we're not going to have as many seeds as we have, and we may have lost a lot of the diversity that we're trying to protect. So what's a typical time? Well, the research indicates that typical times are between 50 to 400 years if we put seeds into very specific and ideal conditions to be able to store them. But some are even less than 50 years. So what does this mean? It means that we have to treat these seeds as living collections. We have to take them out of the seed bank and test them periodically for viability and know when they have to be replaced so that we don't lose these resources. So what are the ideal conditions that we're looking for? There's three things that are really damaging to seeds and cause rapid aging. The two biggest ones are temperature and humidity. The last one is oxygen. So in order to preserve seeds for a long time, we need to be able to dry them down. So take as much moisture out of the seeds as we can, which usually puts them in equilibrium with about 15 to 25% relative humidity. and then we freeze them to about -20 Celsius, which is about a 0-degree freezer that you could get from the store. And then we try to vacuum seal them and take as much of the ambient oxygenated air out from around them as we can. They still need little bits of all these things, but to survive. But if we can keep them low, we can really improve that longevity before we drop off into that rapid mortality part of that curve. So these can be done with very low-tech methods. Here is our colleague, former colleague from the now Native Plant Trust in New England, standing next to a chest freezer that's purchased from a big box store that's storing seeds in foil envelopes. And this ranges all the way up to really high-tech places, like some of these places like Svalbard and NLGRP in Fort Collins that have these massive walk-in freezers that are controlled and have lots of backups to them. So why do seeds last different amounts of time? Well, it really depends on the seed. And unfortunately, this is something that seed scientists are still trying to understand and trying to figure out. It's not on some of the things that we might typically think are important, like the size of the seed, but things that can affect it are some of the seed traits. When and where we collected the seeds. So were the seeds really mature when we collected them to put them in a seed bank? We've also found that where they're collected from can matter. And that probably has a lot to do with the environmental conditions. And then two of the things that we also know really affect seed longevity is the moisture content, the oil content of the seeds. So if we want to look to try to make some generalizations so that we don't have to try to figure out what every single species is up to, we can make some connections across families, but we can also do this by looking at seed type. And there's three broad categories of seed types: orthodox, intermediate, and recalcitrant. And as you might guess, that these seeds really function along kind of a continuum, that they don't ever completely fit into one box or another. Orthodox seeds, like these up here at the top of this amaranth, these are a lot of the seeds that we're familiar with from our local plants. Our asters, our legumes and beans, our grasses mostly have orthodox seeds. And what this means is that they can handle being dried down into that 15 to 20% range, which is really important because then when we put them in the freezer, when they're dry, the ice crystals that form are pretty small because there's not a lot of moisture, and so they don't damage the seeds, the cells in the seeds, and cause them to die. Intermediate seeds are things like coffee is a great example. I love my coffee, so I'll talk about that. And these are seeds that can handle some drying, but they can't be dried really far down, and when you freeze them, they don't last very long in the freezer. And then recalcitrant seeds, these are lindera or spicebush, other things in that family like avocados, but then also oaks and hickories and walnuts are all recalcitrant. And that means that they can't handle that drying process. If you take all the moisture out of them, the seeds can't continue to live. But there's other hopes and other possibilities for these, which is why I have a question mark next to recalcitrant, is it may not be completely hopeless that these seeds can't be stored because there's other options out there, like freezing them in liquid nitrogen, so cryogenically freezing those tissues. And this is a pretty amazing process. You can think of it as like making gelato. You want to freeze the tissue very fast at very cold temperatures to make the smallest ice crystals possible. So it's pretty neat technology, but it's also pretty expensive and it requires some special training in order to be able to do that. So most of the seeds that we deal with in seed banks, except for some of the larger and more sophisticated banks, deal in these orthodox seeds. I'll take a quick break. I'm gonna check and see if there's any questions. Looks like we're okay on questions right now. So I'll keep going, and if you have questions, go ahead and put them in there and we'll get to them here at the end. So we've learned a lot about seeds and seed banks and the science that's going on in those. And it's really amazing what's happening out there. But we kind of want to look at now, and for the rest of the talk, or for the next section of the talk anyways, how seed banks are doing. What is it that we're capturing? We're doing a really good job of maintaining and understanding what we do have, but how are we doing? So the FAO's 1,700 seed banks that are out there in the world estimate that there's about 7.5 million accessions. That probably is pretty light. That's probably really hard to track data from all those places. So maybe it's even more accessions than that. But only about 1/3 of those accessions are unique, meaning that about 2/3 of those are duplicates or backup collections. And those duplicates are really important. The Syria example that I gave earlier with Svalbard is a great example of that. All seed banks should be doing a good job or starting to improve upon how they have backup collections. So if they ever lose their primary collection, those seeds aren't lost forever. But what that also means is that a huge amount of the diversity that's out there in the world isn't being captured by seed banks. And this is where a lot of the native plant or the wild seed banks start to come in. So what have they been up to for the last 30 or 40 years or less that they've been on? This is a table that kind of goes through and shows some of the different goals that have been set by native plant seed banks. Some of the goals are global in nature. So Kew Millennium Seed Bank is looking to bank 25% of the world's flora by 2020. A pretty lofty goal, something they're working on. But then there's also nations that are doing these on a national level, and some that are even doing them on local levels or regional levels. California has the ambitious goal of 100% of their flora being seed banked. In New England, 75% of the threatened species. And so that's the other thing you might notice on this table is that some of the seed banks are focusing on native species in general, and some are focusing on threatened species. And these seed banks that are focusing on threatened species are really working directly to try to stop extinction in the wild. So they've got probably about the most refined and specific goal out of these. So here's a lot of lofty goals and the targets, and these were 2020 seemed to be a very popular date, and it's 2020 now, so we're going to start seeing hopefully this year some more information coming out of some assessments on how we're meeting these targets in order to prevent extinction in the wild and protect our native species. So here in North Carolina Botanical Garden, we've got a really long history of seed banking. We've been seed banking for a little over 40 years. Part of this came from our original partnership in 1984 with the Center for Plant Conservation. And so this, remember, is an organization in the US and now kind of larger North America as they expand and grow, that's looking to collect and store seeds for rare plants to prevent extinction of the wild by seed banking. This is just a quick chart. You can see our seed bank. We hold collections from all over the East Coast, primarily the Southeast, and the majority of our collections come from within North Carolina itself. NCBG has also been a partner with Seeds of Success. So we've had partnerships in the mid to late 2000s with Kew and the Millennium Seed Bank. And we've also had a partnership with Seeds of Success and a couple other gardens, the Native Plant Trust and the Mid-Atlantic Regional Seed Bank in New York on Staten Island, working to collect seeds for restoration and to bank those seeds. And most recently, we've opened up a Native Plant Materials Development Program in 2019. So we're only going into our, we'll hit our first full year of having that staffed in June. But last year we were able to collect hundreds of species and start to grow them for restoration and create larger seed banks that are available for those native plants. So one of the other strategies, and this is one that we'll compare some of the NCBG data to here, is looking at the Convention on Biological Diversity's Target 8 for the Global Plant Strategy. And I chose this one because there have been some assessments of this even before they got to 2020. But Target 8 talks about trying to have 75% of the world's threatened flora in seed banks by 2020. And in 2017, there were two different analyses done that both concluded that we were about a third of the way there. Again, I'm curious as we get into 2020 if that's reassessed and if we've inched that number higher. So one of the questions I've asked recently of our seed bank is how we're doing at NCBG. So this is some things I worked on with the Fish and Wildlife Service and our partners at the North Carolina Natural Heritage Program. And this is looking at just species that occur within North Carolina. So this isn't a regional assessment, it's the state-only assessment. And we've got some different conservation categories on here, which is what the different colors represent. And the numbers in parentheses down here represent the number of species in each of those categories. So the orange bar that you see on the left-hand side of the graph there represents things that are protected, species that are protected by the Endangered Species Act in North Carolina. So there's 27 of them. And we have managed to seed bank over 80% of those species successfully in our seed bank. That number might even be higher because there are other gardens and other institutions that have been working on some of these species as well. So we might have an even higher number of that. But we've reached that target, 75% by 2020. So I think that's a good thing. That's a good success story that we need to get out there. But one of the other things that we've started looking at recently is the Endangered Species Act doesn't cover every species. And so there's a lot of other conservation categories. So this blue bar, these will represent global ranks of species. And these G1s are the really rare species. These are the species that only occur at one or a few populations in the entire world. So they're super rare, they're super restricted. And this has been a recent focus that we've been working on with CPC and with Wes Knapp from the Natural Heritage Program, is to try to increase the number of G1 species, these super rare restricted species that we have in our seed bank. And we did a few of those collections over the last couple of years that have really started to do that. And they represent unique collections, some that are the only collections of that species in the entire world. So pretty important stuff, and something that we are going to continue to try to increase that number for. So another thing we can look at, another thing that can help us understand our seed bank and to make better collections, is to not just look at the species level, but to look at the population level. So here in the top graph, if you imagine the bars represent the total numbers of populations of species in North Carolina, and the different letters or the different colored bars represent different grades that we can give populations. So just like your old report cards, your school grades, A's are good, we want A's, B's aren't bad, but then as we get down into the blue bar, into our D's, those are not so great, and the ones we really don't want are these F's, the yellow bar. These are populations of plants that have been lost from North Carolina. They haven't been seen for 20 years or more, and in some cases we know specifically that they're extinct, that they've been extirpated from our state. So these are the ones that we really have some concern about. And if you notice on the bottom graph down here, these are the collections we have in the seed bank. We have a lot of A collections in the seed bank, and there's reasons for that. Those are easy populations to get to. They often flower and fruit, where some of the small populations do not. And then as we get down into these lower sections, they become harder to collect. But there's something that, because we've got increasing numbers of these, some other data I'm not showing is these D's and F's are increasing more and more over time. So we want to really focus on these. A couple highlights that we do have, Canby's dropwort is one species that is extirpated from North Carolina as far as we know. And we're working with the Plant Conservation Program and some other agencies to try to refine this plant and to improve its habitat. But we have seeds of this in our seed bank. So if we can't find the species again, we've got the potential to do restoration work with it. Sea beach amaranth is another species. This is one that has had 98 or 99% of the known individual plants have declined over the last 20 years. So it's had massive losses throughout its entire range. And so we work to seed bank seeds from this annual and are actively doing restoration with it as well to try to increase those numbers that are out there. And then also sensitive joint and vetch. This is another species that just a few years ago, the last populations in North Carolina disappeared. And luckily we've got a few seeds of these in the seed bank as well, and are working with Fish and Wildlife to hopefully do some restoration out near Lake Mattamuskeet, this species. I saw a question pop up. I'm almost finished, so I'm going to hold those questions till the end. Oh, and the last one that we're working with now, not all the populations of Venus flytrap fall in those low D's and F's categories. There's still some good A's and B's out there too. But the garden has been working the last several years to seed bank as many populations of Venus flytrap as we can. And so far, we've got about 48 or 49 sites represented by the blue dots on that map of Venus flytrap seeds that we've collected and stored for conservation. So the decisions that we make on this, hopefully it's become pretty clear that they're not made in isolation, that we really rely on a lot of partners. These are some of the large partners that we work with, but there's a lot of individual partners. There's a lot of state agencies. I've mentioned a few of our colleagues on from Georgia. We work with them frequently on helping to bank their seeds. And so this is something that is a highly collaborative process. And luckily for us, we've got a lot of great partners that help make this happen. So what other science do we do here in North Carolina at our seed bank? We work on germination protocols, figuring out the best ways to try to germinate some of these seeds and understanding their biology and ecology. This plant, this beautiful flower here, is Georgia indigo bush or Georgia lead plant. And this is a species that we're just submitted a paper for that we've found through using the seeds from our seed bank requires fire for germination. And we have ongoing restoration and reintroduction projects going at multiple scales. We're currently working with about 7 or 8 rare taxa on reintroductions as well. So we're really using the seeds that we're putting into our seed bank for a lot of different things. We're also planning for our future. Here's a schematic of a new building that we want to be able to implement someday at the North Carolina Botanical Garden that will house our herbarium and our conservation and horticulture staff, but will really increase the capacity that we have. It'll make a bigger, more secure seed bank for us, give us more opportunities to continue some of this great work. So our take-home messages, seeds are important. They're a really important conservation tool. They're really important for our food security and for the things that we need in life. And there's a lot of seed banks out there that are really doing amazing work all over the world at every scale. And as we continue to have these rapid changes, we need every single one of these seed banks and probably even more. The collections aren't static. Seeds are alive and they're constantly changing. We have to curate them just like we curate living collections in our gardens, around our houses, and anywhere else that we're trying to take care of living things. And we must keep learning from them. We've got to learn how to keep improving these processes and how to take these seeds that don't live very long, even in the seed bank, and find new methods to make them live longer. And there's still a lot of work to be done. There's still a lot of collections to be made. There's still a lot of species that need our help, particularly a passion of mine and something I'm interested in are these rare ones. And we're continually racing to find these collections and get these collections made so that we can have high impact for the work that we're doing. And with that, I'll just leave you with a poem or part of a poem from Edgar Guest about seeds. And he's talking about going and being able to buy a packet of seeds from the store. And he says, "It flashed through my mind as I took them this time that you've purchased a miracle here for a dime. You've a dime's worth of power no man can create, and you've a dime's worth of life in your hand. You have a dime's worth of mystery, destiny, and fate, the wisest, or which the wisest cannot understand." And with that, I just will thank you very, very much. And hopefully we've still got a few minutes left here to take some questions.
Great, thanks, Mike. We've got our first question is coming in from Ed Harrison. So he's been patiently waiting with his hand raised. So I'm going to unmute and allow them to talk and ask their question live.
Sounds great.
Am I unmuted?
Yep,
You are. I can hear you, Ed.
Okay, it was a written question just to ask. Sounds like West Knapp is the main heritage program contact. Are there others involved too?
Yeah, there are. So a lot of that data I worked with Misty Buchanan and Suzanne Mason as well from the Heritage Program to kind of get that data pulled, and Brenda Wickman, who kind of came on near the end as a new hire as the state botanist. But Wes has done a lot of evaluation of extinct taxa in North America, and also a lot of evaluation of those super rare single site endemics. So we've been talking a lot about ways to find those species and to work with those species to get them protected.
Okay. And he gave a great lunchbox talk on that in recent years.
Yes.
All right, great. Thanks, Mike. There was a few that came in from Jay in the chat. So the first one was, how many seeds are considered a collection?
That's a great question, and I'm not quite sure I understand. Can you clarify that question at all? Let's see.
Let's see if Jay can chat in. Jay had a number of other questions as well we could get to. So are there seeds that do not need to be kept cold? And then also, how do banks obtain their seeds, collect the seeds themselves? Are they donated, or are there other ways? And then I'll just, yeah, maybe we can start there.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so, a collection of seeds can really be anything. We try to follow the best practices that are laid out by the Center for Plant Conservation for our rare species. And those are really the baseline for other protocols for common species like Seeds of Success. And so when we make collections of seeds, we spend a lot of time assessing a population to make sure it's large enough for collections, and then trying to make sure that we collect from as many individuals as possible, usually and often even keeping those collections by maternal line. So we keep really good record of what our diversity of seeds that we have in collections are. And then I guess as far as like the general storage of them goes, we have a specific room that we use to control humidity that keeps our humidity at about 35%, which is kind of where seeds go for a seed purgatory, if you will, until they can be completely cleaned. And then we use saturated salt solutions to get them to dry down into that 20 to 25% range that we like most of our seeds. And then they're vacuum sealed in little foil bags and put into a chest freezer. So they're just frozen. You can store seeds at 5 degrees Celsius, so a refrigerator basically. But there's been data from the last 20 and 30 years that shows pretty consistently, repeatedly, that freezers are even better than refrigerators at keeping seeds alive for longer.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. A follow-up on the collection question. Jay just gave us some more information. You mentioned banks having many collections of seeds. Does each bank determine how many to contain for each species, or is there a scientific standard?
Again, there's some standards with the best practices for rare plants, and some ideas of how many seeds you need to be able to capture enough diversity. And there's some geneticists that are doing some really good work on that. Currently, if possible, for rare species, we look to collect about 2,500 seeds at a minimum. And part of that is because you've got to have a big enough collection that you can take seeds out and do testing and research on while maintaining enough seeds in your seed bank for keeping that collection to the highest level. Now, of course, with rare species, there are times where you can't do that. One of these really rare species we worked with a couple years ago, there's only 2 sites known in the entire world. One of the sites only has about 100 plants, and only about 1 to 10% of those flower in every given year. So since we don't take every single seed out of a population, because that's really bad for the population of plants to take all of the seeds, we take a very small portion, about 10%. So we only have about 100 seeds of that species collected so far, and we work over a long period of time to increase that number. For common species, the goal is usually about 10,000 seeds. 20,000 is even better, but that gives you enough in your collection to be able to do restoration and research with.
That's great. Thanks.
Yeah, great questions, Jay.
Another question was, could you recommend any resources for seed collection and storage that individuals can take?
Yeah, so that's a good, I'm not sure, I think there's some stuff, if you get on to the Center for Plant Conservation's website, which is saveplants.org, you can link to their best practices, which would give you some resource and some more background information about how collection and storage is done. Some of that's going to be pretty hard to do at an individual level, but maybe Joanna, this is a workshop we can plan for doing someday when we're able to be back together, is maybe do a seed collection workshop so that people can understand maybe a little more how to save their own vegetable seeds from year to year, or even go out and do some collections. Other than that, the best way to do it, again, once we're able to stop being socially distanced, would be to come volunteer at the garden. We do have some volunteers that work in some of our seed programs, and our horticulture department also runs some seed volunteers that work with our Wildflower of the Year program to help distribute seeds to the public.
All right, I think we're gonna close out here in just a moment. Mike, thank you so much. Thank you to the audience for being here with us. Thank you for the great questions that you offered as well. I did want to know we do have Johnny Randall, who's agreed to do a next virtual lunchbox talk on, I believe it's on the 14th of May. Is that correct, Ben? We are working.
That's when it'll be.
We are working on the topic, and we'll get that loaded up into our registration system as soon as possible. And also wanted to remind folks that once you close out of the Zoom, your browser will open with the survey. Please give us feedback, help us to improve. This is our first virtual lunchbox talk. We want to hear how to make it better. We also want to hear your ideas on what you want to learn about virtually while we're closed and into the future. So again, thank you, Mike. Thank you, participants. Great to be here with you today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. It was great doing this. I had a great time. I hope everybody else did as well.